Welcome back, Defenders. Jake here. We've got some pretty exciting news for Ukraine. Ukraine situation reports U.S. warming to sending ATACMS. The Biden administration appears to be closer to sending Ukraine two weapons it has long sought, ATACMS and cluster munitions. So what has changed in the last month? Three events. The first one is the Russians blew up the Novokakhovka Dam. They're the ones who escalated this war. Two, Prigozhin's rebellion, showing weakness across the board in the entire Russian system. And then three, the United Kingdom and France are already sending longer-range missiles, the Storm Shadows and the Scalps. So the United States' justification for not sending ATACMS just grew weaker. And the real reason I think the United States has not sent ATACMS, the DoD is not going to admit this, but there's a limited number of ATACMS, and Lockheed Martin currently isn't making any more. That's the real reason I think the United States hasn't wanted to send ATACMS. Yes, they're very expensive. The United States might want to prioritize other military aid. But over the last 20 years, Lockheed Martin has only made 4,000 ATACMS. Some were used in Iraq and Afghanistan. Some have been sold to allied nations that also operate HIMARS. So what is the United States' existing stockpile? And I think I've heard the number, it's around 1,000. But that's a limited number. Lockheed Martin is not making more. And the reason why is in 2024, they're going to begin production on the next generation of this missile called PrSM. So here's the charts. It stands for Precision Strike Missile. Lockheed Martin is still making GMLRS, which is why the United States is still sending GMLRS for the HIMARS every month. But as far as ATACMS, if we send it, we then don't have it until 2024, when Lockheed Martin begins replacing them with PrSM. That's the real reason, but I think the political pressure has just grown too much, and President Biden will send a limited number, probably close to 100 or 200 of them. In addition, public opinion in favor of Ukraine has shot up dramatically over the last month or two. So a Reuters poll came out where the percentage of Americans in favor of sending more military aid shot up by 20%. This also could be kind of a leading poll in that because F-16s have already been sort of approved, the training for Ukrainian pilots has begun in so many countries, I do think there's a lot of Americans who are just saying now, just do it. Just give them ATACMS, give them cluster munitions, give them F-16s, get this war over as fast as possible. The threat has always been Russia using nuclear weapons in retaliation, but I've made the argument here on this channel why Russia will not use nuclear weapons. So this is good news for Ukraine. This is a very capable and deadly missile system. And this is the range that has everyone in Russia panicked. Now the Ukrainian government has promised all Western governments they will not use these missiles on the internationally recognized territory of Russia, but all the occupied territories, including Crimea and the Kerch Strait Bridge, that's all fair game for ATACMS once they show up, I think later this month. And the story of ATACMS ties into this next story. Ukraine lacks necessary equipment, but still advances, according to General Zaluzhny in a rare interview. So Reznikov is the defense minister. He's the political outlet for the Ukrainian military. He's the one that does interviews and speeches and meets with other world leaders. Zaluzhny is their commander-in-chief of the armed forces. He's the one conducting this war. And he gave a rare interview stating this: "It's not a show the whole world is watching and betting on or anything. Every day, every meter is given in blood." Zaluzhny has the burden of command, knowing that when an attack order is given and Ukrainian forces leave their trenches, soldiers are going to die. Soldiers are going to be wounded. He then added, "Without full supply, these plans are not possible at all, but they are carried out. Yes, maybe not as quickly as the participants of the show, the observers, would like, but these are their problems." General Zaluzhny is making the argument that no Western military would do what Ukraine is currently doing in their counteroffensive without air superiority. Ukraine doesn't have the planes yet to support their ground forces. In addition, Russia still has an artillery advantage. They're firing more shells every day. So Ukraine is attempting to go on the offensive at a disadvantage in artillery. Not a good combination. So I do think that Ukraine is getting realistic. Perhaps we were hoping that Russian lines would crumble and all these mobilized men and prisoners would start surrendering in mass. But it's just not happening. So I do think that this counteroffensive will continue, but at a slower rate. And if it bleeds into this fall and this winter when more advanced weapon systems show up, this could save Ukrainian lives. And one of the systems that I'm deeply looking forward to is GLSDB. And unfortunately, Boeing and Saab announced last week that GLSDB has been delayed. It was supposed to arrive at some point this summer, but now it's not going to make its debut until this fall. What does that mean? September, October, November? With GLSDB, the holdup is X-ray scanning all of these rocket boosters. They're very old. To make sure there's no cracks in the solid propellant, they don't want these things exploding in the launchers, so safety is critical before deliveries can be made to Ukraine. Additionally, there's Abrams tanks showing up at the end of the summer, F-16s this winter, potentially cluster munitions, GLSDB, and probably some other things coming. And every day I argue Russia grows weaker. And the metric that everyone likes to look at to ask the question, how is Russia doing, is the strength of their currency. And over the last year, the Russian ruble, compared to the US dollar, has devalued by about 55%. So when we zoom out to the 5-year charts, Russia's currency was hovering around the 60 or 70 mark. But when you zoom out and go all the way back to 2008, so about 15 years ago, Russia's currency is devalued by 275%. Not a good situation. And this is why Putin announced he will be increasing the pay of his soldiers and security forces. Desperate Putin boosts his soldiers' pay by 10.5% as he tries to shore up support in the ranks after humiliating Wagner mutiny. The problem with a 10% pay increase is that if the purchasing power of your rubles decreased by 55% and you get a 10% raise, you're still taking a 45% pay cut over a 1-year period, once again for the purchasing power of your rubles. So Russia's economy is in free fall. All of the numbers that their central banks are giving to the IMF and the World Bank, they're completely made up. All the numbers are fake. Nobody knows how bad the economic situation in Russia is because Russia is lying to everyone and lying about everything. And I've made the economic argument here on the channel that central banks in the West are raising interest rates and holding them at elevated levels to apply maximum economic pressure on the Russians. Yes, they have to do this anyways to control and combat inflation. Inflation is coming down, but inflation might be sticky for a while, and I think central banks are going to keep holding their rates at elevated levels until the Russian system breaks. The most important metric as far as breaking Russia's economy is their oil exports. Here's the price of Urals oil. If you remember, the EU price cap went into effect on December 1st, and Russia's no longer allowed to transport their oil exports on ships insured by the West as long as the oil doesn't exceed $60. And the $60 price cap is pretty much held for almost 7 months. So if we zoom out and look at the 5-year performance, Russia was getting closer to $100 a barrel going back a year ago. Today it's 50, 55, 56. You got to also factor in what is Russia's production costs, closer to 40 or 50. Russia's making barely any money off their oil exports these days. And it's all commodities across the board. When we look at what are Russia's money makers, what do they make their money off of? Yes, it's crude petroleum and refined petroleum products, but number 4 is coal, and number 5 is petroleum gas. When we look at the price of coal going back a year, it used to be at 450 US dollars per ton. It's now down to 127. It's collapsed by 80%. Russia's profit margins are being destroyed. Same is true with natural gas across the board. Whatever chart you look at, the price over the last year has come down by close to 80 or 90%. All devastating news for Russia's income sources. Russia's deepening economic problems have resulted in a collapse in commodity earnings, drastic cuts in federal government spending, and rail freight yards being clogged with thousands of Chinese shipping containers that are sitting empty for want of goods to export. So currently Russia is importing a lot from China, but they produce nothing of value that the Chinese want beyond oil. So all these Chinese shipping containers are piling up everywhere in Russia, and Russia has no use for them. It would cost money to just send them back empty to China. So they're just piling up everywhere in Russia. Here's an interesting photo taken by Russian soldiers complaining about the quality of the ammunition they're being provided. These artillery shells were produced by the Soviet Union in 1939. Yeah, if I was a Russian soldier handed one of these, I don't think I would put it in the barrel of the gun. How can you trust that this thing won't explode in your face if you try to use it? Same is true for medicine. A Russian soldier took this picture being handed medicine with an expiration date of 1997. So the Russians are using 100-year-old rifles, 70-year-old artillery, 60-year-old tanks, and 30-year-old medicine for their armed forces. Nobody knows how deep these Soviet stockpiles go, but seeing all of this outdated equipment and medicine and supplies being used, Russia has to be close to exhausting their Soviet stockpiles. When we check in on the front lines, there's actually a lot of interesting things happening. Ukraine is applying pressure in several locations. So in Bakhmut, the Ukrainian forces continue to attack and make progress on the north side of the city and the south side of the city, retaking territory. I do think over the coming weeks and months, they could encircle Bakhmut and force the Russians to pull out. The main vector of attack continues to be in the Zaporizhzhia and Donetsk region. Ukraine still is advancing, still is applying pressure to the Russians here. But what everyone's been talking about the last couple days is Ukrainian forces crossing the Dnieper River in the Kherson region. And I'm just going to defer to the YouTube channel Reporting from Ukraine. He puts out 4 or 5 minute update videos every day. It's excellent quality content. I highly recommend it. But what the Ukrainians are doing is they're using the ruins of the Antonovsky Bridge as shelter from mortars and artillery. And apparently there's a bunker underneath this section of the bridge on this side of the river that they're using for shelter and protection. The Russians have been trying to clear them out from this bridgehead, literal bridgehead, and they can't seem to do it. And what Ukraine is currently trying to do is destroy the bridge section right here to cut the Russians off from this island area. All this flooded when the dam was destroyed, but the water has receded, and Russia can no longer control, these marsh areas. Basically, there are houses and buildings here, but I'm sure all the people are gone. But Ukraine is going to continue applying pressure everywhere to drain Russian resources and distract them. The main bulk of their counteroffensive force hasn't been committed anywhere really yet, so it's pretty interesting. Let's talk about Prigozhin. And Prigozhin allegedly was spotted in St. Petersburg. He was allowed to fly there and collect some of his personal belongings before going to exile in Belarus. This is Prigozhin's personal bodyguard right here. But someone noticed something interesting about this Prigozhin. The real Prigozhin is missing a part of his left ring finger, and the guy getting into this helicopter has his entire left ring finger. So the speculation is this is not Prigozhin, it's a Prigozhin body double wearing a face mask and a hat to look like Prigozhin. But the real Prigozhin, I don't think, would risk his life going to St. Petersburg to collect some hard drives and passports. And Budanov says that Russian FSB assigned agents to eliminate him. And I'm going to continue making this argument. I think the FSB guaranteed Prigozhin's security. Prigozhin never would have stopped his rebellion abruptly unless he got security guarantees that the FSB wouldn't assassinate him in the coming weeks or months. So I think the FSB is telling Putin what he wants to hear. Of course, Putin wants Prigozhin dead. And the FSB might even be telling Putin, yeah, we got our best guys on it. It's going to happen. Don't worry, Mr. President. But I think the FSB is getting ready to replace Putin. The Russian presidential elections are coming up in 8 months, March of 2024. The elections are rigged, and the FSB already knows who's going to win. So I do think they're managing Putin, telling him what he wants to hear, telling him that, yeah, Prigozhin's going to fall out a window in the coming months. But in reality, I think the FSB views Prigozhin as a useful ally if they need to shore up a replacement government for Putin. If they choose one of their own FSB insiders to replace Putin next March, they can bring in Prigozhin somehow into the government to increase popular support. We'll see what happens. I mean, this is coming up pretty soon. The Russian Ministry of Defense has terminated their catering contract with Prigozhin's company. Devastating. How is Prigozhin ever going to manage to survive without his catering contracts with the Russian MOD? Prigozhin also announced he's closing down his media company responsible for infamous Russian troll farms. So Prigozhin and the Wagner Group out of St. Petersburg were operating these bot farms to spread Russian disinformation. So for everyone on social media that supports Russia, all of these content creators are going to see a drastic decline in their views and engagement as millions of Russian bots just went silent. As I argue, Prigozhin now has an incentive for Ukraine to do well. If Prigozhin wants serious power in Moscow, in the Kremlin, and Putin needs to be taken down for this to happen, Prigozhin now has an incentive for Ukraine to do well, for Ukraine's counteroffensive to succeed. He wants the central government in Moscow to weaken as much as possible so that he can seize power for himself. So, shutting down this disinformation bot farm kind of makes sense when you view Prigozhin's true objectives. And for some reason, the Wagner Group is still being allowed to recruit across Russia. So here's a map showing all of the recruitment offices across Russia. And people online have been filming themselves calling these offices, confirming that the Wagner Group is still recruiting. They're still taking Russian men, telling them, yeah, we'll send you to Belarus, we'll send you to Africa. The Wagner Group is no longer allowed to fight in Ukraine. That's a good thing. And Russian men, I guess if they want to avoid the war in Ukraine, they can join the Wagner Group. Let's now talk about the story we don't want to talk about. And this might be the destruction of the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant. According to Ukrainian intelligence, July 5th, so this is coming up in 4 days, is the most likely date Russia will blow up the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant. The military contingent is gradually leaving the territory of the station and reducing their patrols. A number of Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant workers were also instructed to leave the station by July 5th. The first ones to leave were Rosatom employees. So, what can Ukraine do? And aside from sounding the alarm and talking to other world leaders and warning Russia not to do it, not much. So Ukraine is preparing for the destruction of this plant. They're giving training to emergency workers how to deal with radiation. So they're publishing videos and instructions how to decontaminate people who have been exposed to radiation. I mean, this is pure nightmare fuel right here, guys. And there it is. With the reservoir completely drained now, you can almost walk across the lake bed. So this picture is taken from the Ukrainian-controlled side. So what Ukraine needs to do is get multiple cameras from multiple angles with night vision watching this nuclear power plant 24/7. The fact that Ukraine wasn't already doing this with the hydroelectric power plant was a mistake. It'd be really nice if there was video evidence proving an internal explosion. So hopefully Ukraine has numerous cameras from the Ukrainian-controlled side of the lake watching the nuclear power plant. When it explodes, I mean, the evidence is going to be irrefutable, but Russia doesn't care. And I hate these graphs of the hypothetical spread of radiation. It really depends on which direction the wind blows, but it could blow to Russia, it could blow to Crimea, it could blow to Moldova, Bulgaria, Romania, Turkey. We're gonna figure this out together, guys. Dimitri over at War Translated has a couple interesting videos. The first one is of Russian wives complaining about the treatment of their husbands and the insanely high casualty rate they're sustaining. I'll link this video down below if you want to check it out. It's 3 minutes long. There's also a video of Russian penal soldiers mutinying. So these are people taken from the prisons by the Russian Ministry of Defense being used as cannon fodder. It's a 2.5-minute video in which they explain how they're not getting anything they need to actually survive, and their casualty rates are astronomical. But on Kremlin State TV, you're not going to hear from dissatisfied soldiers or the loved ones of people dying in Ukraine. You're only going to hear about how amazing the dear leader is.
Здравствуйте, дорогие друзья и товарищи. Давайте начнем с вами с кадров дня. Крики, визги, аплодисменты, буквально мольбы о совместном фото. Путин приехал в Дербент и пошел в люди. Президента, судя по этим максимально заряженным на эмоции кадрам, встретили так, что даже рок-звезды могут курить в сторонке. И это на фоне зубоскальства коллективного Запада о том, что после пригожинского мятежа президентская власть в стране перестала быть крепкой. Путин доказывает, что все ровно наоборот. Где еще так встречают национального лидера? Где вообще так?
Where else does the national leader get greeted like this? Where is anyone greeted like this at all? What about Prigozhin on the streets of Rostov-on-Don? So the Kremlin is trying to do damage control and convince everyone on television that Putin is strong and the people love him. This was weird. Some suspect footage of Putin in Dagestan to be a body double. The real Putin doesn't fly anymore. He takes a train everywhere. The real Putin doesn't let anyone get close to him unless they've gone through 10 days of quarantine. So who the heck is this guy, letting this dirty child touch his face? Putin is the richest man in the world. He's the most conceited person in the world. And either this is a fake audience that all went through 10 days of quarantine, or this isn't the real Putin. And the body double, the clone, went to some kind of event and had this weird interaction with a digital whiteboard.
Вам логотип уже нарисовали.
Didn't Hitler like to paint as well? And the body double signed his weird coffee character, and I want to show you the signature. So here's the signature of the real Putin. This is Putin's actual signature. And this is what the body double signed below his coffee character of some kind. So, real signature, the body double signature. They don't look like they match. And Gherkin, being so cynical several times in the past, has stated, of course, Putin is using body doubles. And this is what he had to say. Putin has a special epidemiological safety regime, but he could not refuse the residents of Derbent in Dagestan. And Gherkin says, why is Putin visiting Dagestan and not Rostov-on-Don or Varennes, the cities attacked by the Wagner group? Why is Putin not attending the funerals of the Russian pilots shot down by the Wagner group? It's pretty cynical, but I mean, Gherkin is a terrible human being, but if he wants to trash Putin, I will gladly spread that message. And here's a video he put out yesterday about Prigozhin's rebellion. There were numerous cases like this. Those rebels who pushed the country to the brink of destruction were promised a full amnesty, and then they were just hanged. I'm not calling for Prigozhin to be hanged, although he deserves it, but to fail to punish him at all is a worse crime than breaking your word. So Gherkin is arguing that Putin should have told Prigozhin whatever he wanted to hear to make him stand down, and then betray him, double-cross him, and have him executed. If our president in this country thinks not only of himself and his entourage, but also of the state, he cannot leave unpunished this kind of mutiny that has brought the country to the brink of ruin. Because Putin demonstrates his total powerlessness and shows that this is the way to act, try it, guys. Try it again. And if you fail, you will not be punished, because I, Putin, am a spineless woodlouse and cannot punish those who force me to pack my bags and rush to a plane and fly to St. Petersburg. So Gherkin just called Putin a spineless woodlouse. That's pretty cool. Poland wants to host NATO nukes to counter Russia. In response to Russia announcing they want to station their nukes on the territory of Belarus, Poland is countering by saying, we want NATO, so the nuclear powers of France, the United Kingdom, and the United States, to station nuclear weapons on Polish territory. Tit for tat. Other good news, Denmark has allocated another $190 million in aid to Ukraine to purchase more artillery shells. So thank you so much, Denmark. Final feel-good clip I have for you guys is an emergency delivery to the soldiers fighting on the front lines.
Доставка пиццы в ресторан «Окопчик». Давай. Спасибо, ребятки. Вот. Пожалуйста. Опа. Благодарочка. Будем рады заказать у вас снова. За быстроту благодарим.
They got pizza and coffee delivered to their trench. Okay, that's all for this update video. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. If you found this video informative, give me a thumbs up. Best way to support the channel. Comments and questions, let me know down below. I love hearing from you guys. Till the next video, keep defending the truth, keep defending democracy.